Good morning. My name is Scott Hare. I get to be one of the pastor, leader, minister types here. In fact, I think my actual title is preaching minister, which is sort of the golden title for me, the idea that that's my whole job is to teach and lead and do those kinds of things. So I'm excited to be here. If you are a visitor of any kind, we want to make sure that you feel most welcome. If there's anything we can do, I can do specifically, I'd like to do that for you. This morning I want to talk to you a little bit about something that is a little bit jarring, but I think once understood actually is really freedom-giving. But before that, we need to kind of back up to go forward. So if you would, go with me about 2,000 years ago, just a little hop. What's really wild is you're going to find a man who does this really wild thing. He divides history, or at least we remember him dividing history. There's all kinds of conversations that goes on with that. But what I want you to think about is the idea that Jesus in particular does this wild thing where his actual life for the majority of the world says that before Jesus it looked like this, and this is how we track things, and after Jesus it looked like this. So if you came in and you'd never seen anything before, and you didn't know anything about humanity, you didn't know one thing or another about history, this would be a very serious point of interest. Who was this one human being that the majority of human beings would say after his life had reshaped the understanding of the world, of how people interact, of how communities should be? Things like forgiveness, the way that we understand it, show up during this time. It's wild to think about that one singular fact. I mean, if you knew, for instance, that your life was going to divide time, what would you do? If everything was going to focus on what your life looked like, how would it look? It's wild to think about that one thing. Whether you believe in Jesus or not doesn't matter in that case. It just is interesting historically. Another piece, when you think about all of that, like all of history's pieces, then try to imagine this. Try to imagine if you had a huge magnet, a history magnet, right? My favorite kind of magnet. A history magnet, right? And what you were going to do is everything that Jesus touched would affect that magnet. It could suck it right out of history, right? And you're going to drag this massive history magnet right across time, and you're going to pull everything that Jesus touched or influenced right out of the world. Like it didn't exist. No church, no Bible, no understanding of like radical sacrificial love, like no forgiveness the way that we understand it. None of the things that come from like the story and the gospel of Jesus. Like draw it all right out. No Christmas songs, which always makes my middle son super, super sad. I have to watch him. He'll literally listen to Christmas songs way too early. Like he'll try to leak them in during Halloween. And I'm like, we wait for Thanksgiving. And if you want to have that argument, we will have it, by the way, after this. But imagine this picture, right? Everything is drawn completely up out of history. Here's my question for you, and I think it's a reality, is would you recognize history? Would you recognize time? How much of the very best of us would be gone? It's interesting to think about how much is actually held together, or at least the beautiful parts are held together by even the idea of Jesus. People that don't believe, don't understand, might even disagree with Jesus, still will often use phrases like Good Samaritan and prodigal son and all kinds of things that actually still attach themselves to him. It's fascinating to think about the impact that this one man has on human history. Wild, actually. The truth is, when it comes to Jesus, you don't have to believe in him, of course. You can even hate him. You could love him. You could vilify him. You could follow him. You could use him as a rabbit's foot, a little good luck charm. You could use him as fire insurance. You could do all kinds of things with Jesus. It turns out there's only one thing you cannot do with Jesus. Do you know what it is? Ignore him. That's it. That is the only thing you cannot do with Jesus. And so right here this morning, what I want you to begin to do, and me too, been doing this all week, is to think about what it means to reset, really reset ourselves. Where are we with this man? Where are we with this story? Where are we? And I don't get like any kind of bonus for anybody's like nothing like that. But what I'm saying is like let's all in a very real way, not in a number thing, like in a real human way, like just us this morning, just you. Like, what is your relationship to Jesus? Even in this moment right now, you know that you have a complex relationship just like me. But I hope that you also can recognize the only thing you can't do this morning is ignore him. Even if it's just because I'm up here yelling about him. Where are you with Jesus? Isn't it funny how even that word has this weight to it? Can define you even just by thinking about the word itself. Would you stand with me as we read the scripture this morning? Because I think this is a moment in time when that question gets asked in a very strong way. We read from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, beginning at verse 27. Let's read together as a community. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. I love the Gospel of Mark. He's hilarious. He's like, don't do the thing you're going to do like immediately. Okay, let's keep going. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." Pretty intense little ending. You guys, these are the words of the Lord. Please be seated. One of the things that right up front, Jesus is wanting to know is like, what's our relationship? Let's define our relationship. Where are we really? And I think it's kind of fascinating to begin to think about. And to be honest, if you're like me, this changes over time. Like when I was a kid, I just thought Jesus was great. He was kind of like a superhero in my life, like the superhero, right? And he just flew around and did amazing things, and I was supposed to remember all the stories, and that was great. And then I kind of grew up, and the superhero didn't seem so shiny. And then there was a time or two when I just sort of tried to ignore the unignorable. I just sort of left. And then the engagement became so intense over time that now the relationship I actually feel with Jesus sometimes feels more real than the relationship I have with my wife or my children at times, which is wild. but true. So these things change and they develop and they become sort of, they meet us where we are. And I have no doubt that over the next year, 5, 10, it's going to change again. No idea what that's going to look like, because as I can look back over time, I can realize how often it has so far. I can only assume it'll do the same. Jesus is asking that of the disciples. He says initially, who do people say that I am? Fascinating, right? What's the gospel? What's out there, right? And the first thing that the disciples say to him is like, some people say you're Elijah, others say you're John the Baptist, who's dead, by the way, both of them. Now, Elijah is supposed to return, of course, and so there's a little bit of a prophetic vision there that he might come back. John the Baptist has been recently beheaded, and actually Herod himself actually thought that Jesus is that. Others say some of the prophets. What's fascinating, though, is they're all in the same category, the category of the prophetic voice. Somebody that is drawing back to what is right. And that's good, but to be honest, it was never really a time in my life that I ever thought of Jesus as any one of these things. Not really. Because part of this story is that Elijah, we look at him and we say, oh, he's an amazing man of faith, he's a prophet of God, but we don't often think about, and yet he killed all the priests of Baal in some horrific moment at the bottom of Mount Carmel. He is an amazingly intense, wildly visceral person who is sort of on the edge, pushing all of the authorities to the limit and even taking on lightning itself. Like Elijah is intense. There is no question about it. Brings down fire, explodes the altar on top of Mount Carmel. This is the image of Elijah. Elijah's not a robe wearer snacking on locusts only, right? This guy is a fiery, intense, viscerally, in some ways, violent person. John the Baptist pushes so hard against the authorities that are oppressing the people, worse than that, oppressing God's word and life, that he's actually beheaded. And the prophets, well, go down the list, they don't actually end up usually in a nice cozy retirement. But do we ever think about Jesus that way? I mean, not really. I'm fascinated with this response. Some say you're Elijah, others John the Baptist. And it brings me to that idea, I think Jesus often just wants to surprise us. Most of the time, I find myself trying to meet the new situation of my life with the old Jesus. I haven't let Jesus grow up anymore because it's scary to let him out of the bottle. I like to keep him in I understand, I know, I get it, I know all the phrases, I know all the stuff, I've read all the books. And when it really comes to now I've stretched myself well beyond my ability to know where I am or if I should even be here, I'll still try to meet the new experience with the old version. It's like I have to be reminded, pretty quickly, it's going to be something different and more than you ever thought. I have a friend, he's in recovery, and I think he helps me understand what I'm supposed to do when these moments come. And I kind of get locked down. In fact, he's a recovery pastor. His name's Chris Estes. He's a good friend of mine. And one of the stories that he likes to tell is when he was early on in recovery, he was taught that one of the first things that he was going to need to do was pray before he did anything. And that his sponsor was going to be very intense about this. Like he would say every time, well, I just don't know what to do here. I don't know what to do there. I'm not sure who I am in this, blah, blah, blah. And he would always say, well, have you prayed, right? And the way that he taught him this is Chris called his sponsor really early on when he was having a lot of anxiety, and he called him and he was like, hey, this is what's going on. I'm not sure how to handle it. Da-da-da-da-da-da. And then his sponsor said, have you prayed? And he said, well, no, but I click. Hung up the phone. Chris thought, well, that's strange. We got disconnected. So Chris calls him back and he says, hey, that's weird. We got disconnected. Listen, what I was saying was, and he goes, did you pray? And he's like, what? Did you pray? No, click. I get it. Okay. Like I was supposed to pray. Like I understand. Like I get what you're saying is that I really need to start to pray, right? And he's like, did you pray? Well, no, click. So he prayed. Now for prayer, it's this. It's not the prayer that I grew up with around the table, come dear Jesus, be our guest, let this food by thee be blessed, no, it's a prayer that looks like this. I hope maybe that you'll respond to me now in a place and in a way that I have never understood you before. I'm going to stop praying for the things that I already have and start opening my heart to the possibility you're going to answer. Lord, I'm here. Speak to me. I don't know what to do. And I'll be honest, most of the time I'll have some sense of something. Sometimes I'll have a profound word that'll come to me. If you've never had that kind of experience, or you've always wondered, I'll encourage you on a couple things. One is to do it. The second is to don't do it alone. It seems to me that the people that hear from God all by themselves in isolation, just like anything else in isolation, becomes dangerous. But amongst people that you go and care about, it changes the world. Let Jesus grow with you, maybe even beyond you. I wonder what we would say. Then he says it, he just turns it around on them. I don't know if they saw it coming. Surely by this time they did. They'd been with him for a while. Who do people say that I am? And they jump right in because they've got good answers, right? But they should have at least known with any kind of decent teacher that the next thing that was going to happen. He's like, oh, really? That's what they say? What do you say? Right? And they realize on some level that they have a very different understanding than the rest of the world. People say all of this thing about you. What do you say? And probably half, if not more of them would have been like me. Well, it could be this, it could be that. I don't really know, And I get in this mind thing, and Peter just cuts right through it, and he says, and I love the way that the Mark gospel says this, and the NIV puts it. It's just one little simple sentence with a period on the end. It just says, you are the Messiah. What's beautiful about that is it feels like a really clear answer, but a clear answer that opens the door to the unknown. I know you're the one that we've been waiting for, but I have no idea what that means next. When's the last time in our faith life, in our church life, that we thought to ourselves, well, I know we're this, and now I have no idea what comes next? Oh, yesterday, right? We're right there right now. How exciting is that? How terrifying is that? So the picture rolls, and Jesus basically says, yes, Peter, he gets it right. And what my mind wants to do right now is just go crazy because there's so much in this, and I'm not going to do it. But there's this clarity that Peter has where he just drives right into this point. And one of the things that might be interesting to know is in the context of all of this, the words Caesarea Philippi are actually really important. Caesarea Philippi is actually a place in the northern part of Israel. It's way up north. In fact, right now, there are missiles that are flying back and forth over Caesarea Philippi, which is a little weird to think about if you've actually been in that space because it butts right up against Lebanon on one side and Syria on the other. But it's this ancient place, and at this time, thousands of years ago, it was a very specific place. It was the sort of Vatican for pan worship. And Vatican for pan worship essentially meant the worst of the worst. I'm not going to be able to tell you in church, and I would encourage you to be very cautious if you go online and ask about pan worship. You'll find some things that you don't ever want to see, and you probably will not be able to unsee. But there is this picture of all of that. And so the real picture is, why does Jesus take these disciples who are definitely not supposed to be in this space all the way up there to ask what his identity is? And there's some other powerful things I got to skip over this morning because it's in the book of Matthew. That's all right. But here is this image, right? He takes them all the way up to Caesarea Philippi, these young, probably kids, teenagers more than likely, that go up to Caesarea Philippi. They're faced with this question in the middle of all of this ugliness. It would be like trying to take somebody to the worst parts of, I don't know, New Orleans or Bangkok or Vegas. Like, think of the worst places. Combine them all, make that worship level, and then have your kid go in there with Jesus, and he's eyeballing them with those fiery eyes because people are getting confused because of Elijah, and they're sitting there staring at him. He's like, who do you say that I am here? Not comfortable in church, not comfortable on your couch, not thoughtful in the library, but who do you say I am when it's all out here right now? That's where Peter says, you're the Messiah. I love that image. There's a really important part of it, though, that comes next. Again, in the book of Matthew, one of the next things he says is, from then on, he turned his face to Jerusalem. Little phrase. Confusing unless you realize that from that moment, right there at Caesarea Philippi, right there where his identity is being challenged and he's challenging others about who he is, he literally turns his face not to just Jerusalem, but of course, when he's turning it to Jerusalem, he's turning it to the cross. He's headed to his death, which is the next thing that he says. He explains to them, you're right, and this is what's about to happen. I'm going to die brutally, then I'll be raised from the dead. And in the book of Mark, he's like, and he says that plainly, which is really funny because he says it pretty plainly in the book of Mark, and then the book of Mark says he said that plainly. It's almost like the book of Mark wants to say, for sure, he's really said this. He really said it in a very direct way. Don't mistake it. He told us this was going to happen, and then he actually got his skirt right and took off to go and stinking do it. And then he does something wild. He looks at everybody and he says, then he goes to the crowd. He basically says, look, if you want to find out who you really are, then take up your cross and follow me. Don't you think at that point, Peter's like, man, I shouldn't have been so quick with that whole you're the Messiah thing. Because now the challenge is, are you willing to lose everything to gain it all? Because that's discipleship. Maybe it's similar to basic training. Anybody go to basic training? Anybody ever survive that sucker? Yeah. When you go to basic training, the thing that they're going to do is tear you down and build you back up. That's the idea, right? Well, in a much more intense way, that's what it means to become a follower of Jesus. Everything that you believe about yourself is going to be challenged. I used to tell people, and I believed it, like, just accept Jesus and everything is going to be okay. Love, right? And now I say that differently. I'm like, hey, listen, caution. If you accept Jesus, everything that you believe about yourself is going to be challenged, especially the things that are damaging to you. You will not be able to stay the same person. All the stuff that is telling you who you're not, the broken things that are trying to keep you from your full life, they're actually going to be taken from you. They're going to be challenged in you. The small version of your life that you think is a victory, also gone. He does that when he says, what's good is if you gain the whole world and lose your soul. It's funny, at Caesarea Philippi now, it's a beautiful ruin. There's a lot of story there. But this image of Jesus saying, take up your cross and follow me, and then sort of turning to the crowd and saying, that crowd that's involved in all that stuff and all that ugliness and all that horror, and saying, what good is it if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? My teacher, Ray Vanderland, likes to be on this hill and turn around at this moment when he's teaching a lot of this, and he startles everyone because he turns around and he's way up high and all the tourists are down low, and he turns around and he screams, what good is it if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? And it echoes, bah, 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 right? He did it for years, and I've gotten to do it too. One of the great stories, though, is that he turned around and went to yelling, right? And there was only one group of people down in the little hole. You know who they were? Nuns. Half dozen to a dozen nuns in habits down there looking all around, and here comes Ray. What good is it? And all this kind of stuff. He said halfway through yelling it, they're just staring at him, big eyes. He finishes and they all go. Which is beautiful too. Here are these women who the white interior of their habit is their wedding dress, who've given their whole lives over to be married to this man in this beautiful, total giving way. Powerful image, but a startling moment for everybody. But I suppose that's the final question. If we all actually do have a sense that there is more to this life, that we are more, or even worse, that we've gotten to a place where we're sure that we're not, and we've sort of given away from this idea that, well, maybe this is just it, and we're going to have to just make the best of it. There is this larger story that is going to continue to pull at you. You cannot ignore it. It's going to draw you in. It's going to ask more of you. It's going to be transforming around you and looking to transform within you. It's the way that it works. The question is going to come again. History and everything that is with it and holds it together wants to weave you into this larger, profound hope and say that your life and your identity itself was realized in this world fully and completely, and the invitation to come and follow. Give up all the stuff that's lying to you about yourself. Let it go. Let the whole thing die so that you can become the person that you're actually made to be in this moment and in this life. That is the picture and the hope of what happens when Jesus turns his face to Jerusalem and says to the crowd, including you and me, take up your cross and follow me. And they walk out of all that hell to deliver hope to the whole world. And we're still talking about it today. I love what Frederick Buechner says. He rattles around in my mind and heart a lot. I wish I was as eloquent as him, but I'm not. So here's my version. When it comes to believing in Jesus, there's really only one reason why. And it's not all the things that you might think about along the way, that he's this or he's that or he did this or he did that, or miracles or any of those things. At least not the ones that we read about. The only real reason is simple and profound, and that's this. Jesus, whatever kind of man, whatever kind of mystery, whatever kind of language we clumsily put on him, in the world and in you and in me, has the power to transform half-dead and sometimes fully dead people into fully living, loving, hopeful, transformative people. That is the only real thing worth any time. And it's the only thing that the world actually needs. Will you pray with me? Eternal God, we're so grateful for all that you are and all that you have, and we'd ask that you bless us today. Help us to know that you ask us this question every day, with every moment, and every hope. Help us to answer honestly and completely. We ask all this in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen.